Hello everyone. Welcome back to the live interactive sessions on circular dichroism and Mosbaire spectroscopy. So in the last seven sessions, we have discussed about circular dichroism. The last lecture was yesterday where we finished our discussion on circular dichroism. So now, from today's lecture onwards, we will be talking about Mosbaire spectroscopy. In today's session, before discussing in details about Mosbaire spectroscopy and solving its questions, I'll be introducing you briefly to the concept of spectroscopy, uh, different type of spectroscopic techniques, and what are their basic principles, etc. And then we will come on Mosbaire spectroscopy discussion. Uh, I hope by now you have enough clarity about circular dichroism topic. If you still have any doubts, you can ask me in the following sessions. I request everyone who has been following the recorded sessions, in case there is a time clash issue, please try to join the session whenever possible. Uh, and for We will be waiting for next 4 minutes so that if anyone has to join, and then I'll start on our today's discussion. Okay, so it's 6:05, and I think I should start now. So I'll start with the basic explanation, basic discussion of what is spectroscopy. I know this has been already discussed in the main lectures, but it's just a brief summary to set the momentum of this session. And there are few questions also on. There were few questions in the last assignment on this particular topic, spectroscopy and all. So just to give a brief summary, so spectroscopy. I'm sure everyone is familiar with this term, but just to introduce spectroscopy, it is the study of interaction between electromagnetic radiations, or you can say light, in different wavelength region or frequency regions with matter. Matter can be solid, liquid, solid and liquid specifically, using techniques where the incident electromagnetic radiation or light is either to observe how this matter, the matter, it can kind of absorb the light, it can emit the light, scatter the light, and these properties helping help us to understand the properties and composition of matter. So you guys might have studied of uh, UV visible, NIR, absorption spectroscopy. Most of you might have used this spectroscopy technique in your everyday chemistry research, or infrared spectroscopy, Raman, fluorescence, NMR, electron spin resonance or EPR spectroscopy, and the one which we will be studying today, Mosbair spectroscopy. And in the last seven lectures, we also discussed about circular dichroism spectroscopy. So it's all about how light interacts with matter, and by different type of in different type of light absorption regions, we can study different properties of the material based on the type of light we are using, but in particular. So in spectroscopy, we generally get a spectra where we have on the x-axis we have energy like we on x-axis we are talking about energy, like the amount of the like the amount of energy, or you can say the energy of light being incident on the matter. So energy of light being incident on the matter, energy is h nu or hc by lambda. So on x-axis we are talking about energy, and in generally in any spectroscopy on x-axis you find either your wavelength in nanometer, or you find frequency in centimeter inverse. So this is what you generally we talk about. So this gives us the qualitative information. This gives us qualitative information of the sample. It tells us which type of what type of sample we have taken. It's about type of sample, like whether the sample absorb in UV reason, visible or NIR reason. And on y-axis, we generally talk about the intensity of light, intensity of incident light. And so on y-axis, we talk about intensity of light, which is a quantitative feature. That is, it gives us the quantitative information whether we get an intense or weak absorption band. For example, when you record a UV spectra of a metal complex, so you take a dilute sample and you get a metal complex, that is metal bound to an organic ligand scaffold. Here I am just showing you the pyridine, and it could be any ligand. Hello, hi Indiza. Can you hear me? I hope you have been following the sessions, either recorded sessions. So in today's session, we have started. We will be starting with Mosbaer spectroscopy. So before arriving on Mosbaer spectroscopy, I am introducing the concept of spectroscopy, different spectroscopic techniques, and how they differ based on the reason these electromagnetic radiations absorb. Okay. So yes, if you take a dilute sample and you get a peak, so you get a pi to pi star transition, and in some cases there is some n to pi star transition. And if there is this MLCT bond present, and then you have a DD transition peak here. So now in your some of your studies, you would like to understand the changes in this MLCT DD transition peaks. So what would you do? You would to just see these peaks, to see the evolution of these peaks, you will take a concentrated sample where the ligand based peak gets saturated, but you get a comparatively strong peaks for MLCT and DD. So this shows you the quantitative property, the y-axis. So this shows the amount of sample you have taken, or the type of uh, like the quantity of sample. It is just the quantitative information you get from your y-axis. So this was about. Now, this was about UV visible NIR spectroscopy, and your UV visible NIR spectroscopy. Okay, so you have in your UV visible NIR absorption spectroscopy. You have wavelength on your x-axis and absorption on your y-axis. And in this, you get a information from 250 to almost 1800 to 1800 to 3400 nanometer, and this tells you about energy transition, that is change in energy observed for an electronic transition. Oh, I'm sorry, the screen, I got disconnected. My screen was not visible till now. So, and then you have a IR spectroscopy where you measure percentage transmittance versus wave function, wave number, sorry. I'm sorry, wave number in centimeter inverse, and you get a peak like this. So your energy Hc, where your omega is your wave number, and this spectroscopy you can measure from 400 to 4000 centimeter inverse. So, UV and IR spectroscopy, both these spectroscopic techniques are based on change in energy states, like the transition. So, in IR spectroscopy, you basically measure the vibrational frequency changes. So, then comes our NMR spectroscopy, which is nuclear magnetic Resonance spectroscopy. And this spectroscopic technique is based on change in nuclear magnetic states. Is based on change in nuclear magnetic states. That is, for example, we will be discussing it in just a minute. Before that, so the electronic magnetic radiation used for recording an NMR spectra is radio frequency electromagnetic radiation, and it is a weak electromagnetic field. So the electromagnetic radiation used for recording an NMR spectra is radio frequency electromagnetic radiation. And for generating NMR signals, we need to apply radio frequency pulse perpendicular to the direction of external magnetic field. We need to apply radio frequency pulse perpendicular to the direction of external magnetic field. So what happen when we apply an external magnetic field, the sample degeneracy breaks of nuclear spin state breaks, which results in the population difference. So we applied an external magnetic field. So this is your nuclear magnetic state plus minus 1 by 2. Okay, nuclear magnetic state. So your nuclei is, let's say, plus 1 by 2, spinning in clockwise and anti-clockwise directions. So now, initially, these two states were degenerate, filling the same energy level. But when you apply an external magnetic field, B naught, these degenerate energy levels break to give a energy difference, which is a ground state and a higher excited state. So now, when you so you applied an external magnetic field, and the degeneracy of this nuclear magnetic states break, and now you have, let's say, your electron is in plus 1 by 2, and you from outside now gives a radio frequency wave. So what happens, this nuclei in plus 1 by 2 spin state will go to minus 1 by 2 spin state, get excited to minus 1 by 2 state, and this is how you get a signal in NMR spectroscopy. So without magnetic field, your nuclei is spinning in all the possible spin states without magnetic field. And in the presence of external magnetic field, so when you apply an external magnetic field B naught, the nucleus starts precessional motion. We discussed about this precessional motion in the last lecture. The nucleus starts precessional motion. So precessional motion you can kind of relate to the top. So you everyone has kind of played with top in their childhood. So what you do, you take a top. It's a conical thing, what we say lattu in Hindi. So you take it and you spin it such that it is spinning like this in a conical, it is making a circular orbit, and it is kind of conical, like this, but it is, so what this top is doing, it is moving circularly in its own position, like spinning here, and now while spinning it is moving at different positions in an orbit, just like our earth, it is spinning on its own axis and spinning also around the sun. So it's that's what you call your precessional motion. So this is how it looks like. So initially it was spinning here in all the directions, the nuclei, and when you apply an external magnetic field, it starts exhibiting the precessional motion, and it kind of moves in a conical motion. And this is what leads to your different energies, different spin states, which breaks the degeneracy. So when precessional frequency will become equal to the applied radio frequency, to frequency, resonance will occur, and the nuclear transition transition from ground state to excited state will take place. So, what are the properties of nucleus to give NMR signal? Does all the nuclei, all the atom give gives you like all the atomic nuclei gives you NMR signal? So that we have to find out properties of nucleus to give NMR signal. So not all the nuclei and their isotopes in the periodic table are NMR active. Not all the nuclei and their isotopes are NMR active. So for a nucleus to be NMR active, it should be it should exhibit non-zero nuclear spin. That is, I must not be equal to 0. So on the basis of nuclear spin number, nucleus can be divided into two types. Into two types. Magnetic nuclei and non-magnetic nuclei. So magnetic nuclei has a non-zero spin nuclear spin. Non-zero nuclear spin. And it is NMR active because of this reason. Whereas non-magnetic nuclei has I equal to 0 and it is NMR inactive. So how can you find out which of the nuclei are NMR inactive? So what you have to see, that mass number of non-magnetic nuclei will be completely divisible by 4. For example, 16O, 16 oxygen, 12C, 32 sulfur, etc. And NMR, and which are NMR active nuclei, 1H, 13C, 19F. And what is there is one other condition also. So to obtain a good quality NMR spectra, the nuclei should have good natural abundance and less quadrupole movement. So this was about NMR spectroscopy. So NMR spectroscopy depends on nuclear spin states. And now your electronic spin resonance spectroscopy, it depends on your electronic spin. Electronic spin resonance spectroscopy. And its other name is electron paramagnetic resonance. So what is the criteria for electron ESR spectroscopy? For a molecule or species to be ESR or EPR active, it should it should contain an unpaired electron. Example: oxygen, NO, NO2, etc., or any paramagnetic compound. So if the molecule does not have unpaired electron, it can be converted into radical cation or anion species before recording its ESR spectra. So, so the basic principle of ESR and NMR spectroscopy is similar. In NMR spectroscopy, you talk about nuclei spin states, spinning of change in nuclear spin states, and here you talk about changes in electronic spin states. So here in ESR we talk about electronic spin state similar to nuclei. And here your beta is EH by 4 pi mc. So what is the difference? Now this was the similarity. What is the difference? So NMR uses the principle of nuclear scattering upon exposure to radiation. NMR deals with nuclei whose spin value is non-zero, but ESR defines identifies electronic spin states in a molecule. So uh, NMR is about atomic nuclei and ESR is about electronic spin states in a molecule. So EPR studies magnetic systems with unpaired electrons. And this is our electromagnetic radiation chart where your NMR spectroscopy uses radio frequency, electromagnetic radiation in radio frequency region, which is less than 10 raised to minus 5 electron volt. Then your vibrational spectroscopy, which is used by FTIR spectroscopy, and its range is 10 raised to minus 4 to 10 raised to minus 3 electron volt. Then comes your NIR, visible, and UV reason, which is this is your optical absorption spectroscopy reason. And then you have X-ray, 10 raised to 10 raised to 4 electron volt. And after X-ray you get gamma rays, very high energy electromagnetic radiation, which are more than 10 raised to 4 electron volts. So we talked about NMR spectroscopy, very less energy uh, electromagnetic radiation. We talked about vibrational and absorption spectroscopy. We don't have much on X-ray spectroscopy, but this gamma ray electromagnetic radiation reason based spectroscopy is very important for today's session, which is Mosbaire spectroscopy. And now we will talk about Mosbaire spectroscopy. Mosbaire spectroscope. So it is also called Mosby spectroscopy is also called gamma resonance spectroscopy because in it uses gamma radiations to interact with our mm, matter like the molecule of interest. So your Mosby spectroscopy involves the absorption of gamma rays by a nucleus, and it results in a nuclear transition. So it does not uh, leads to nuclear spin transition, but nuclear transition. That is, it goes from one nuclear spin level to another nuclear spin level. Not the spinning like plus half and minus half, which is the changes in spin clockwise or anti-clockwise rotation. But here it changes from one nuclear spin level, like from 1 by 2 to 3 by 2, then 3 by 2 to 5 by 2. So depending on it, it changes the levels. Nuclear transition happens here. So Mosbaire spectroscopy involves the absorption of gamma rays by a nucleus, resulting in a nuclear transition. And there is a famous scientist, Rudolf Mosbaer, who discovered Mosbaer spectroscopy in 1957, and I think later he got a Nobel Prize for this. The year was Rudolf Mosbaer. So yes, he discovered this Mosbaer spectroscopy in 1957, and he got Nobel Prize in 1961. He was a German physicist, and because for his discovery of Mosbaer effect, he got the Nobel Prize. So Rudolf Mosbaer discovered Mosbaer spectroscopy in 1957, and later got Nobel Prize in 1961 for it. And if we define the basic principle of Mosbaer spectroscopy, so it is a resonance absorption of gamma rays by a nuclei in a solid sample. This resonance absorption happens when gamma rays of a specific energy matches the energy difference between two nuclear states. So this is the representation. You have I equal to 1 by 2, and then there is another nuclear uh, spin state 3 by 2. So I by 1, if you have a transition within the same uh, within the same uh, nuclear spin, that is plus 1 by 2 and minus 1 by 2. Then radio frequency is used, that is for NMR recording. This is where radio frequency kind of changes the interacts with nuclear spin magnetic nuclear magnetic spin changes, but gamma rays comes where there is a transition between two nuclear spin levels. So in Mosby spectroscopy, nuclear state changes, and in NMR, nuclear spin state, that is changes in direction of nuclei. The spin rotation changes. So in Mosby spectroscopy, electronic nuclear interaction will be involved in nuclear state change, and this electronic nuclear interaction is what we call hyperfine interaction. It helps This hyperfine interaction helps in determining the oxidation state and spin state of metal. Mosby spectroscopy and NMR. Here your nuclear state changes, and in this electronic electron nu- electronic nuclear interaction will be involved in nuclear state change. And this electron nuclear interaction is called hyperfine interaction. So your electronic environment will impact your nuclear state changes, and that is what you call hyperfine interaction. And here your nuclear spin state changes. So now there is some challenges with this hyperfine interaction which happens in Mosby spectroscopy. So this electron nuclear interaction or hyperfine interaction is a weak interaction and it gives a poor resolution. So Mosby spectroscopy in terms of energy, it is a you can say it requires a very high energy to get a proper spectra for this. So fine interaction is weak interaction, and the resolution here is poor. And there are conditions for Mosby spectroscopy. First is it involves recoil, less emission, and absorption of gamma rays by nuclei. And the second is atoms in source. So the source from where you emits your gamma rays. So atoms in source emitting gamma rays must be of same isotope, must be of same isotope as atoms in sample absorbing them. Okay, so now you must be wondering what is this recoil effect, and then what is this about the same isotope as sample absorbing them. So let's get into the details of it. Okay, so now in Mosby spectroscopy we have a source nuclei or source nuclei, and then there is a sample nuclei. Now this source nuclei emits your gamma rays. Okay, this is what you call nuclei 1. So it it goes from its excited state to its ground state. This is what your delta E, while emitting your gamma rays. So this source from its excited state it goes to its ground state while emitting gamma rays. So your E gamma is equal to your E transition from excited to ground state, and then there is this recoil energy associated over here. Recoil energy during the transition. Recoil energy during the transition. Okay, so now where this recoil energy comes from? Okay, so now you might have set in a boat. So what happens generally, uh, you might have seen this, or for example, you are on a board. Okay, so you are on a board, on on a board, and there is this water where you have a boat. Now to go in this boat, you jump, and you jump such that this boat is at rest, but this boat, when you jump into it, it kind of moves away, right? It moves away, and because of that someone has to hold that boat, because there is you a heavier body going from a rest to a body, to this particular body. So there is a certain kind of recoil energy, so to balance your momentum that you has brought on, it kind of moves away. Okay, so that is your recoil. So what happens when you, also when you go from your boat 1, Let's say you're moving from one first boat to second boat. What happens? So when you jump from this boat to this boat will uh, so this boat will move back to shift the momentum, to balance the momentum, and this one will move towards. So like there is this energy balance. So in this energy balance, there in this process there is some energy lost, which you call recoil energy, to balance the momentum. Now you must be wondering how your nuclei, what your nuclei has to do with this recoil energy. So generally what happens, you take a heavier isotope to emit gamma radiations, and we will be talking about these isotopes which generally are taken for emission of gamma rays. We will go in details of that. So you take a heavier nuclei, for example 57 cobalt. So this 57 cobalt, when it captures an electron, it goes to its it goes to a lower uh, s- it goes to kind of its I equal to 3 by 2 state. From its excited state, uh, it captures electron, and uh, it goes to a lower nuclear spin state, that is I equal to 3 by 2, and from there it comes to the ground state while emitting gamma radiations. So this kind of loses some energy over here, and your and when this energy is transferred to your source nuclei, it kind of absorbs more. So here your source nuclei loses this recoil energy, and your sample nuclei will gain this recoil energy. And what is this recoil energy? It is er equal to half mv square, or you can say p square by 2m momentum. So v is your recoil velocity, and your p is recoil momentum. M is your mass. So what happens? You in your source nuclei and your sample nuclei, when the nuclei goes from its excited state to its ground state, it emits gamma rays, and it loses pushbacks, which is what we call E transition minus ER, recoil energy. And your sample push forwards, it goes from its ground state to its excited state, taking up this gamma uh, radiation. It kind of push forwards, so it gains the recoil energy. Okay. Now uh, if you see carefully, so now your source has a certain absorption spectra, and then your sample also has So this is your E transition for your sample, nuclei 1, and this is E transition for your nuclei 2. And this is your reason which we are calling your recoil energy. So this is your recoil energy loss because of poor energy overlap. So it is because of this recoil energy, a lot of energy is lost. So what Rudolf Mosebert did, he provided the solution to this impractical spectroscopy. And what he did, Rudolf Mosebert suggested that to eliminate the recoil energy loss, because the energy lost by your source will not be exactly the energy gained by your sample. So the recoil energy is basically your lost energy, and to kind of preserve that energy, to eliminate the recoil energy loss, it is necessary to increase the mass of the source. The mass of source and sample, because your recoil energy is inversely proportional to mass. So heavier will be your mass of mass of source and sample, lower will be the recoil energy. And how can you do that? By tying down the source and sample into a big crystal lattice, and cooling it to the liquid helium and liquid nitrogen temperature. Okay, so your nuclei was tied down in a crystal lattice, solid crystal lattice. So if there is a heavier body, there would be less recoil energy, and this could be transferred easily to your sample. Increased effective mass. And because of this, your Mosby spectroscopy became a recoilless emission and absorption spectroscopy, because of this idea of Rudolf Mosby. This whole phenomenon became recoil less absorption and emission spectroscopy. Because of the better overlap, so firstly we will look into the questions. Okay, the first question is, so this was the basic introduction. Now we will go question by question because we are left with 45 minutes almost, and we will solve these questions. So, what is the primary source of incident gamma ray for the Mosby spectroscopy of iron samples? So, we studied one of the condition for Mosby spectroscopy. It was atoms in source emitting gamma rays must be of same isotope as atoms in sample absorbing them. Okay. So, Mosby spectroscopy of iron, like 57 Fe, they are asking. Iron 57 Fe. So, Mosby spectroscopy of iron uses 14.4 kilo electron volt nuclear transition. So, to produce the incident gamma rays, one typically uses a radioactive parent isotope that we just discussed that decays to the excited state of 57 Fe. So, for this, so for this, generally for 57 Fe Mosby spectroscopy, a 57 cobalt isotope is taken, which has a 270 days half lifetime in a cyclotron. So what it does on electron capture, it undergoes a radioactive phenomena and it changes to it goes to a nuclear spin state of 5 by 2, which has a energy of 136.6 electron volt kilo electron volt. Now it undergoes a transition from its excited 5 by 2 to ground state I equal to 3 by 2, while losing some energy, which is almost 85%. And from not this was not ground state, it goes back to another ground state 1 by 2 with a energy losing up a energy of 14.4 kilo electron volt, which is in 100 nanoseconds. And this loss of energy is taken up by our sample 57Fe for its transition from I equal to 1 by 2 to I equal to 3 by 2. So this is how your 57Fe uh, MOS-based spectroscopy data is obtained. So MOS-based spectroscopy of iron uses the 14.4 kilo electron volt nuclear transition of 57Fe. So to produce the incident gamma ray, one typically uses a radioactive parent isotope that decays to the excited state of 57Fe. And your 57 cobalt decays by electron capture to 57Fe, populating the 14.4 kilo electron volt excited state, which then emits the resonance gamma. So the source is 57 cobalt, not 57Fe itself. And this is the standard laboratory source used for 57Fe MOSFET spectroscopy. So your right answer would be option D. Now coming to the next question. The Mosby spectrum does not provide information on. First is so so what does not provide information on oxidation state of metal, spin state of metal, the ligand pi donating or accepting properties, and the metal complex stability. So your Mosby spectrum, it probes the nuclear level effects sensitive to the electron density and local electric and magnetic field. So your Mosby spectroscopy, it gives you information about your nuclear levels nuclear state changes, which is affected by your electronic environment. So your Mosby spectroscopy gives you information about the oxidation state, or your S electron density. It tells you about your quadrupole splitting, information on electric field gradient, which is again affected by your strong or weak field ligands. So it does tells you about the type of ligand being used in that particular molecule of interest. It tells you about the spin state of the metal, because it is nuclear spin state that we are talking about, but it does not tells you about the metal complex stability. So your option D is incorrect here. Mosbeer spectroscopy directly probes the nuclear level effects sensitive to the electron density and local electric or magnetic field effects. So, what information you can extract from Mosby spectroscopy? First is isomer shift. It gives information about oxidation state, quadrupole splitting, that is, it informs on electric field strength, which depends on local symmetry and ligand by donating or accepting behavior. So this was your second question. Now the third question is, the recoil free fraction or probability of zero phonon events does not depend on the free atom recoil energy. So if you have a free atom, for example, if we take a free nuclei source and free nuclei sample that is not tied to any crystal lattice, so there would be some amount of recoil energy with it. So it does affect your uh, recoil free fraction in the probability. uh, so it does affects the property of solid lattice, the type of lattice you are binding your source and sample into. It tells you about the mass of your overall, like how heavier your source and sample has now become, such that there is less recoil energy. So lattice does affects it. The ambient temperature, so we talked about, so when you add your nuclei in any crystal lattice, so you maintain it at a low temperature, that is liquid helium and liquid nitrogen temperature. So ambient temperature strongly affects phonon population, that is phonon is your crystal lattice population. So and the properties of your solid lattice, that is your binding strength of your lattice uh, to your source and sample, it does affect. But your high pressure, it can affect that, at up to what high pressure you have put your source and sample into a crystal lattice, it does affect, but not that directly participating in your recoil energy, because it is the pressure have not much role to play. So in the options, you can say that high pressure uh, is the least dependent recoil and recoil free fraction. It is least dependent on the high pressure phenomena. Then we have this question: the absorption of gamma rays during the Mosbaire experiment depends on nuclear density, electron density, the symmetry of the compound, or charge density. So we just now discussed that Mosbaire spectroscopy, it is a nuclear resonance phenomena. So Mosbaire spectroscopy is a nuclear resonance phenomena. So your the absorption intensity scales with the number of resonant nuclei present in the absorber. Electron density influences the isomer shift. We will be talking about isomer shift in the next session in details, which comes from your Doppler effect. So we will be talking about it in the next session. Symmetry influences your symmetry of compound. Symmetry influences quadrupole splitting, and charge distribution affect those shifts. But the actual absorption probability in Mosbaire experiment is directly controlled by your number density of resonant nuclei. So your right answer would be option A, nuclear density. The actual absorption probability is directly controlled by number density of resonant nuclei. So next question is, which one of the following pairs is a canonical conjugate of each other? Energy and space, space and momentum, space and time, time and momentum. So in quantum mechanics, canonical conjugate variables obeys the canonical commutation relations. The canonical pair x and p, which is position and momentum, have this commutation relation xp equal to I h direct. And space and momentum, because space can be defined in your xyz coordinates, that is your three different coordinates corresponding to your position uh, and momentum. Uh, so, space and momentum is the standard canonical conjugate pair. And so, your option would be option B. Energy and time is not a canonical pair in the same operator sense, and space and time are not conjugates in quantum operator sense. So energy and time are two different operators, so they are not canonical pair. And space and time are not conjugate, like they are in quantum operator sense, they are not any canonical conjugates. So your option B is the correct option. Question 6. Nuclear resonance absorption can only observe when the difference of transition energy and emission are similar to the sum of line width. The difference of transition energy and emission are greater than the sum of line width. Absorption and emission light should not overlap. Emission line should be the same as line. So we talked about it just now, that the energy mismatch between emitted and absorption transition must be within combined line combined line widths, so that the lines overlap. So if this was your absorption and this is your emission, so if you have a poor overlap, you will not absorb a nuclear resonance absorption. So for this you must have a higher overlap, that is uh, the difference of transition energy and emission are similar to the sum of line width. That is, the combined light, there must be like efficient overlap. So for resonant absorption to occur, the energy of emitted gamma radiation must match the absorber's transition within the natural line widths, including Doppler broadening, instrumental broadening, etc. Quantitatively, if the energy mismatch between emitter and absorber is smaller than or comparable to the sum of half widths of emission and absorption lines, there will be overlap and absorption. If mismatch is much larger than the line width, there is no overlap, no resonance absorption. So your option B must be correct. B or A for resonant absorption to occur, the energy of emitted gamma must match the absorber's transition energy within the natural line within the natural line widths. The next question is, after resonance absorption, the excited nucleus will decay. After the resonance absorption, the excited nucleus will decay. Gamma rays from the nucleus, conversion of electron preferentially from L shell, gamma ray from the nucleus, conversion of electron preferentially from K shell. So option A and C. Why? So your decay of excited nuclear state can proceed by gamma emission of the resonant photon, that is radiative de-excitation, or internal conversion. First, energy to an atomic electron which is ejected. Your internal conversion preferentially removes electron from K shell because K electrons have the highest overlap with the nucleus. Because K shell or K shell electrons have higher overlap with nucleus. So this was your seventh question. Then we have the last question is, a good resolution of energy transition should have minimum excited state lifetime, low transition energy, high line width, high energy gap between ground state and excited state. So the natural line width of a nuclear level is related to the excited state lifetime by this relationship which is H. Tarek by Tau. That is a longer lifetime in excited state corresponds to narrower line width and hence better energy resolution. So, better resolution requires long excited state lifetime, not minimum lifetime. Better resolution requires long excited state lifetime So your right answer should be a minimum line width. So I don't see an appropriate answer in the option. The right answer should be minimum line width and a longer excited state lifetime. And the option B is also correct. Low transmission energy, low gamma energy helps in a uh, helps in different ways. It reduces recoil energy and practical Doppler velocity ranges for low energy transitions. So, low gamma energy is generally favorable for achieving good effective resonance and narrow observed resonance features. So, these are the three right options that I consider for this particular question. So this is about your spectroscopy, different type of spectroscopies, and the basic, the fundamentals of your Mosbaire spectroscopy. So we have discussed these things in details. In the next session, we will be talking about the Doppler effect. Then we will be solving some questions on Mosbaire spectroscopy, its application, quadrupole splitting, etc. So that we will be talking in details in the next session. So in today's session, we have covered the basics of Mosbaire spectroscopy. We have solved the questions. I have tried to answer all the questions, and if you have any problem in understanding these explanations, or you have any further doubts in this particular topic, you can join in the next session. You can post in the discussion forum also, and you can also write me on my email address. So I have already given it in the previous sessions, tanukaushik29 at the rate gmail.com. So I hope you guys are following the sessions and these are helpful to you. I would love to hear your feedback. Um thank you for your attention. I'll be sharing the notes uh, in the Google Drive link that has been shared with you, and also the recorded sessions are being uploaded on the YouTube channel. The link for it is also provided on your main website, so please check it out there and do follow the sessions. Thank you so much for your attention.